Buddy. So, give me some thoughts on this one. Lynn, what did you guys talk about?
Well, we had a little bit of a different understanding. I thought that maybe because today we tried to be a little more, less frightening,
Right.
gentleize it,
Right.
just make it a little less, just the same, the theory is you need to stay focused when I've asked you to do something or something bad could happen.
Sure. So it starts as a cautionary tale, no matter what. It's
Right.
like you said, it's go straight and do what you're told to do or you're going to get in trouble.
Right. But then Jay thought maybe because, in the 400-year gap that you likely could have been eaten by a wolf. That.
Oh, okay. Sure. I mean, it could be real, yeah. It occurred to me, yeah.
Symbolically, it wouldn't happen today, so.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Other thoughts, things you talked about? Sure.
So, Little Red Riding Hood started out as the victim, pretty much she just got eaten.
Yeah.
And in later stories, she was the hero, and the last one, she was just kind of a bystander.
Really passive in the end, yeah. Kirsten, if you could push that one forward. Here's one of the older pictures of it. But yeah, I mean, I think that we have this idea that we want things to be nice and protected for our children, and we want their world to be good. And we try really hard to make it feel safe, because there's so much crazy stuff going on. But what happens is almost the reverse, is that there becomes this great mystery that you know nothing about, and you become fascinated with the macabre because you're never exposed to it. It's a really kind of a backwards thing. It's interesting because we've now completely desexualized the story. We've made Little Red Riding Hood completely passive. And then it's funny because when I was Googling pictures for Little Red Riding Hood, this is actually the first thing that came up.
Wow.
So we're reclaiming the sexuality, whether it's in the story or not. Okay, and most of us are familiar with Cinderella. In the Grimm's version in the 1800s, it's a very different tale. It's about, again, Cinderella's mother does die. Like Too Good Mother always dies, that's how it starts. He does remarry, has a wife, and she has 2 stepsisters. But the father is going to town, and he asks the girls what they would like. And the stepsisters say that they would like gold and jewelry and dresses. And Cinderella says, please just bring me home the first branch that hits your hat. So he brings her home a hazelnut twig, which she plants by her mother's grave. And she sits 3 times a day in between her work, and she cries over the loss of her mother. And it's her tears that actually water the tree. And the tree grows and creates these gifts that then help her later. Now, these gifts, she does meet the prince. The prince does come to the house. It's a slipper in that, not a glass slipper. And there's this really brutal scene where the stepmother orders one of her daughters to cut off her toes to try to fit in the shoe. And they drive away, and the birds that were in this tree come out and talk to the prince and say, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe, the true bride waits for you. So he turns around and he goes back, and then the stepmother says to her other daughter, cut off your heel so that it'll fit in the shoe. So she does, she literally hacks off the back of her heel and shoves this bloody stub into the shoe, and off they go. She is also discovered because of the blood, and eventually Cinderella actually does get the prince, but it's after a long period of trials for her. Like, she has to sort the lentils from the ash in the fireplace, which is an ancient task. You'll see it in the story I'm going to tell later, of like sorting out what can feed you from what can't. And so it's a very deep psychological tale that got really Disneyfied. And changed. So we took out all the brutality with the heel and the toe. And you think about what an important lesson that is about for women, about amputating important parts of you are to fit in, who you are to fit in to someone else's ideal image of femininity. Let's go to the next. This one's bad. In almost all Northern cultures, some version of The Little Mermaid appears, but Hans Christian Andersen is credited with writing it down. Now, in that version, starts out the same as the new version. She is longing for life above the water. She's fascinated with the land. There is a shipwreck. The prince is thrown overboard. She rescues the prince and falls in love with him. But she's a mermaid, so she can't be in his world. That's the same in both. Here's where it changes. She goes to the sea witch. And the sea witch, like a lot of these old tales, like you're saying, these powerful women who have the duality, they're really strong. This one is one who is kind and can kill you. And this is a very common motif in old folk tales. This sea witch does not want to do this deal with her. She says, no, you're crazy. That's a dumb thing to do. And tries to convince her that her life is good the way it is. She says, no, 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 I insist, I want legs. So the sea witch says, fine, but you're going to pay a really high price. And the high price is, every time you walk, it's going to feel like knives on your feet, because you're not meant to walk. Not only that, you have to pay a price, which is your voice. And she literally cuts her tongue out, like with a knife right there. She says, you have 3 days to get this guy to give you love's true kiss, and if you don't, you will die, and you turn into sea foam. So she goes into the world of the living on her legs that hurt so badly. She tries very hard to win the prince. He thinks of her as this kind of nice little pet. She sleeps in a cushion outside of his bedroom. He's very amused by her because she can't talk, but she's very pretty. He doesn't fall in love with her. She dies. That's the story. And you know the current story. The current story is very different. She steals her voice, but she gets her voice back. The legs don't hurt. She does win the prince. The prince actually impales the evil sea witch, and they live happily ever after. So it's a bit of a different story. And then I have one more kind of coming of age. Sleeping Beauty. Most people are familiar. One of the original versions of this is from Basile. He is an Italian folklorist. He wrote this version down in the 1600s. In this version, Sleeping Beauty is actually meant to have a splinter of flax in her finger that's going to put her to sleep on her 15th birthday. She gets that splinter of flax. She falls deep asleep. She's supposed to sleep for 100 years. Everybody deserts the castle because they're so bummed out. This king happens to be riding by. His falcon, who is he's hunting with, goes through her window and spots her and comes and tells the king about this girl who's asleep. So he goes up to the castle, rapes her while she's sleeping. She becomes pregnant with twins. She's still unconscious. Gives birth to twins while she's still unconscious. One of the babies happens to roll over and suck on her finger, sucking the flax free from her finger, and so she wakes up. So she wakes up with 2 kids. No guy.
No guy.
She goes off in search of this long journey to find the father of her children. When she finds him, he's a king who already has a queen. Queen is pretty pissed off about this, orders the children to be eaten. So the cook can't do it, so he kills a goat and serves it instead. I mean, it's really brutal. It's not the story we have today.
And who wrote that one? Grimm's?
Basile, B-A-S-I-L-E. He's an Italian folklorist. And her name was actually Talia, if you're looking it up. So what I'm going to do is, for the remainder of tonight, I want to go into depth on a story that some of you may have heard and some of you haven't, and it's called Vasilisa the Wise is the version that I have. Sometimes it's called Vasilisa the Brave, sometimes it's called Vasilisa the Beautiful or the Courageous, but this is the ultimate coming-of-age story in Russia. And you're going to recognize some of the figures. The Baba Yaga is one of those really powerful women figures. So I want you to think about the symbols in this story, and we're going to work with them individually as we, right after I tell the story. So the story takes about 10 minutes. I'm going to do just a sip of water here. Once there was, and once there was not, a young mother who lay on her deathbed. See, it's happening already. True story. Her cheeks were as pale as waxen white roses, and her gaze was heavy, heavy with sorrow. And on the end of her little wooden bed sat her daughter and her husband, who mourned already the loss, and prayed sincerely for her safe and peaceful passage into the next world. But as she was drawing her dying breath, she called her little girl to her bedside, and from there she pulled from her hairy coverlet a little tiny doll. And the doll was dressed exactly as her girl, Vasilisa. It had little red boots, and a black skirt, and a white apron, and a vest covered with colored thread. And the mother handed the doll to the little girl, and she said, "Take this, my child. Keep it with you wherever you are. And whenever you are afraid or don't know what to do, consult the doll, and she will tell you what to do. Don't tell anyone about this doll, but you must feed her regularly to take care of her. This is my gift, my blessing to you." And with that, her breath fell deep into the depths of her body and gathered up her soul where it rushed out through her lips. Well, the little girl and her father mourned deeply. But like the field that's cruelly plowed under in the fall, in the spring the furrows gave rise to new green and new growth. And the husband, or the father, took a wife who had 2 children, 2 daughters. And even though they were polite and they smiled like ladies, there was somewhat of a rat beneath the surface that the father could not see. And sure enough, when the father was out, they teased and picked on Vasilisa mercilessly, and they made her work doing all the chores that they would do, so much so that her snowy white skin became blemished, and her eyes got deep, dark circles because she worked long, long hours into the night. And they hated her because she had a sweetness that was otherworldly. And while their bodies dwindled from meanness, hers became round with kindness. And she had a beauty and a gift that came from within. And it got so unbearable for that stepmother and those sisters that one day they finally came together and tried to figure out a plan to get rid of Vasilisa. And the youngest one said, "Let us conspire to let the fire go out. And then let's send Vasilisa into the woods to the hut of the Baba Yaga, where she will surely be eaten to death immediately." And then they clapped and cackled like things in the night. And they scurried around like rats in a refuse pile, excited for their plan. But when Vasilisa came home that night, the house was completely dark. And she went to her stepmother and said, "Where is the fire? How are we going to cook? How will we stay warm?" And she said, "Of course the fire's out. You need to go to the hut to the Baba Yaga and get us fire. I am too old to do it, and your sisters are too scared. Now go!" And Vasilisa paused. She consulted the doll in her pocket, who jumped up and down and said, "Go." So pensively and with fear, Vasilisa went out into the night, into the dark and gloomy forest. See, we have one of those too. Where every crackle of a branch signified some sort of danger. All the moonlight coming through the trees were these shadows that were going across, and she was terrified. But at every juncture when she felt she could no longer go, and her heart would race on, boom, 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 she would reach down in her pocket and feel for that little doll, and that little doll would say, "It's okay, keep going." She'd get to a juncture and she wouldn't know which way to go, and she'd reach down in that pocket, and the doll would say, "This way or that way." And she would break off a little crumb and make sure she fed it. And she walked and walked and walked through that night all the way until she saw before her a white man on a white horse ride by. And she turned and followed him. And soon thereafter she saw a red man on a red horse, and she turned and followed him, and the sun rose. She walked on and on through the day until she felt she would collapse out of abject fear and exhaustion, until she saw a black man on a black horse ride by. And she followed him as night fell. And there in a clearing right before her stood the hut of the Baba Yaga. And it was a fearsome sight indeed, for it was suspended on enormous chicken legs that seemed to dance around and around, even though there was no wind. The gate in front of the house was made of human femurs, and on the top of each femur was a skull with a fiery, eerie glow inside. All the latches on the doors and windows were made of human fingers. And the Baba Yaga, sensing her near, opened the door with a creak. And the Baba Yaga herself was all made of points. Pointy chin, pointy nose, pointy fingers, fingernails curled over like ridges of rooftops, all stained brown, and bony legs walked like this, almost like the chicken legs. And she was a pretty fearsome sight. And she said, "You there, what are you doing?" And the girl, shaking, said, "Grandmother, I come to ask you for fire." "Well, why should I give you that?" And she put her hand in her pocket and felt for her little doll, who told her, "Because I ask. Because I ask." Huh. She smacked her greasy lips. Well, that's the right answer, but come in, you must do some tasks before I give you what you ask. So she brought her inside of her hut. She sat her down and she said, "You must do all my cleaning, my cooking, my laundry. And look out there. There's an enormous pile of corn, 3 stories high." She said, "You must sort all the mildewed corn from all the good corn. And if these tasks are not done by the time I arrive in the morning, you will be eaten." And off she flew on her broom made with the hair of long dead people. It's a good detail. Vasilisa was overwhelmed. She began cleaning a bit. She did some of the cooking. She went outside and she sat down before that huge pile of corn and she began sorting, one from the other, good from the mildewed, so much so that her little tiny fingers began to bleed and her eyes could no longer stay open. She reached down and felt for the doll. And the doll said, "It's okay. I'll help you. Sleep now, child." And so she fell fast asleep on the corn. And when she awoke and it was almost dawn, she saw the white man with the white horse go by. She woke and all the corn had been sorted. And she ran in the house as fast as she could and finished the cleaning and the cooking. And the Baba Yaga arrived and was stunned that the child had completed the tasks. She sat down to her meal, which was enough food for 10 people. She saved a little thimble full of soup for Vasilisa. She said, "I'm not done with you yet. See that mountain out there of dirt? There's 1,000,000 poppy seeds in that. You must sort the dirt from the poppy seeds. You must clean my house, do my laundry, and cook my food." And off she went again on her broom. Once again, Vasilisa was overwhelmed, exhausted even from the night before. But dutifully, she sat down in front of the pile of dirt and one by one began to sort the poppy seeds from the dirt, piece by piece, until she could no longer do it. Felt into her pockets, found her little doll who said, "Don't worry, I will help." And she fell fast asleep, awoke, and the task had been completed for her. Again, she raced in and finished the cooking and the cleaning and was there when the Baba Yaga appeared and again was stunned that the tasks had been completed. Ha! It's amazing, child. Vasilisa said, "Grandmother, may I ask you some questions?" She said, yes, you can ask some questions, but knowing too much too soon makes one too old too soon. She said, I want to know about the white man on the white horse. And the Baba Yaga smiled and said, that is my day. That is my light. And what about the red man on the red horse? Oh, that is the fire of transformation. That is the sunrise. And the black man on the black horse? That is my night. That is all that is unseen. And she opened her mouth to ask another question, but the little doll began jumping up and down and said, no, no, no. And the Baba Yaga said, child, do you have more questions? And she said, no, as you said yourself, grandmother, knowing too much too soon makes one too old too soon. You're a very wise child. How did you become so wise? And Vasilisa looked at her and said, by the blessing of my mother. Blessing? We'll have no blessings in here. And she picked up the girl by her ear and threw her out the hut, following her, kicking her as she went. And as she was kicking her out, she pulled up one of the femurs with the eerie light within and thrust it into Vasilisa's hand and said, go! She thought to turn and thank her, but the doll said, no, go! So she turned and walked towards the forest, holding the femur with the eerie light inside. And at first she was very insecure. I mean, the light itself scared her. It was frightening. She could barely look at it. It felt so powerful. But after she recalled all she had done to earn it, she felt prouder and prouder as she walked. And this time she knew her way through the woods. So it was nighttime when she returned back to her old house. And you can imagine how that looked, because their house was completely dark. And here was this skull bouncing through the forest with an eerie light inside. Well, as soon as they saw it was Vasilisa, they rejoiced and said, oh my goodness, you're back, because they had thought her long dead and her bones eaten by wolves. But they said, since you've been gone, we have been unable to start a fire. We've been unable to cook or stay warm. And so they took the fiery skull and started a fire. But the fire in the skull, the eyes, looked into the three women who had burned Vasilisa. And burned with the truth, they burned those three women to embers by morning. And that is how Vasilisa became wise. So please just pick any moment in the story that kind of sticks out for you and talk to your neighbor about what you think it might have to do with coming of age.